What are you up to, Chrysogonus?
Weeding corn.
Weeding corn? Why are you weeding corn?
Because it's up right now and there's a lot of grass.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it'll be easier right now than it would be when the weeds get taller?
It'll be easier to do it when the corn gets taller.
You think so? But what about the weeds? Do you think the weeds would be easier to get out when they get taller?
No.
No. So it's a good idea to do today? All right. Well, back to it then. There is about, I would say 3/4 of an acre of field corn here. This is something that the younger boys grow for me and I pay them. This is how they earn their pocket money. So I hoed the rows for them and they planted it, and now they hand hoe it. A lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth it?
Yes. For $100.
You're aiming for $100 this year? Well, good. I'm trying to be careful where I walk. The corn is very recently up, and what I have them doing is looking backwards, stepping carefully, and then hoeing on either side as they see the corn. Of course, the boys aren't the only ones weeding right now. I'm hard at work in the commercial field as well, the stuff that we sell. Take a look at this. All along there is kale that we planted this past weekend right before this gentle rain. And there's no weeding that has to happen here because this is newly tilled soil. The plants just went in, but I love seeing how lush and green they are with the weather that we're having this weekend. While the boys are doing their hoeing, I have 3 weeding projects of my own. The first is right in that kale actually, because although almost all of it is freshly planted and weed free, I had a direct seed experiment with some of the kale, and with the seeds planted directly in the ground, of course, the weeds come up right along with the kale, and therefore now I'm left with lots of weedy kale, and I want to show you what it looks like and what I have to do to get it cleared out. This hoe right here, you can see that it's a little different from some of the ones you find in the hardware store. I'm really not sure where you can get them where you live, but having the right hoe is a big deal. Look at the shape of it. It can be sharpened as needed, and what I'm doing is I'm looking down at this row here for my little kale plants. Do you see what I've hoed around? Look at that little guy. Of course, I haven't gotten too close yet. There's the next one. Just coming up. See, there's weeds all around. Later I'll go through and I'll carefully draw the weeds from directly around the kale. But you can see that they're up. Over here you can see where I left off. There's around a beautiful kale plant. Over here there's a kale just going along. Kale, several kale. 2 growing together. Those will eventually be thinned. And the row just keeps going. All the way to the end. My goal is not perfection with this kale or anything else that I'm weeding today, but the fact is that we had a little bit of a dry spell, and then this rain came, and now we're going to have some heat and sun and interspersed with some more rain, and as much as the plants are going to grow, the weeds are going to grow that much. And if I can give the plants a head start at this critical juncture, they'll get what they need to get a head start on the weeds and become the dominant plant. So in this wet soil where roots pull out easily. I have a window in order to do the heavy lifting and give my plants the leg up that they need. And these kale will become the dominant thing in this row. Of course, the kale is not the only thing I'm working on. Let me show you the sunflowers that I direct seeded. All along the kale, I have a double row of sunflowers that I direct seeded a while back, and you can see that I've started clearing these out as well. There's some gaps. That's okay. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you can see just how much the weeds have gotten a head start, and they need some help. I don't know how well it shows up on the video, but you can see that the weeds are more dominant where the sunflowers are, and the hoe doesn't work quite as well. It gets a little clumpy. So I have a different instrument of destruction. Look at this guy. This one will go into the soil and grasp some of these long weeds by the roots, and when the soil's wet like this, they pull up really easily. The hoe would just become a clogged chunk of mud, and I'm clearing it basically every 2 swings. There's a technique to it where I can put it into the soil, grasp the roots, give it a brief punch on the bottom to knock some of those roots off, and move fairly quickly. Let me demonstrate. While I work on my weeding projects, Cyprian's out here in the zucchini and summer squash. How's it coming?
Well,
There's one. As you can see, I've been through all this with the cultivator. Behind the tractor, I can go above the rows and cultivate in the rows, but that leaves the strips where the squash are coming up for us to hoe by hand. And the zucchini and summer squash are still coming up. So basically what Cyprian's doing is he's going through, he's finding the ones that have come up, and he is taking the weeds from around them. Later we'll be able to go through with a little less care and just hack at these weeds, the ones that are left. But basically we're rescuing the squash as they come up. And it's been slow because it's been, first it was warm, but it was dry, and then it was wet, but it was cold, and it just hasn't been ideal for germination. But if we're on top of this, we'll be able to save them and turn out a nice field of well-cleaned squash. It's just a process. It takes time, and you have to be on top of things at the right point when, in this case, the weeds, their roots come out easily. I have one more project once I get done with those ones, and that is to clean up the garlic. Take a look at how it's coming along. Isn't that a beautiful field of garlic? The problem presents itself though when you look a little more closely. We mulch with hay, and that suppresses most of the weeds, but especially on this end of the field, you can see that the ragweed are fairly vigorous. Sure, the garlic looks dominant, but the fact is that it is very soon to escape, and it's at the point in its growth cycle where it really needs all the energy that it can get. So if these giant ragweed are in the garlic and sucking up the moisture and the nutrients at the moment when the garlic needs them the most, I just won't have the size on the garlic that I need. So while a little grass and some smaller weeds that are being really suffocated by the garlic, which is so tall, are fine, the ragweed need to be pulled out, and it's so much easier to do when things are wet like this. The roots come right out. So here, like everywhere else, I'm not aiming for perfection. I'm just trying to get the biggest weeds out. They can lie there and be mulched, that's fine. But I can just go along like this all through. I'm trying to be careful of the leaves. And I'll go on the other side as well of these triple rows. You can see that it was mainly on this end by the trees that there must have been a patch of ragweed seeds, because the farther in that I go, the cleaner the garlic is. But here on the end, it needs that help. As far as the rows are concerned, I can take the weed eater and go up and down these rows, and I don't really have to bother to pull in the corridors. But in between the garlic, it all needs to be pulled. I want you to remember this video when later in the season I show you some plants which are vibrant and some fields which are beautiful, God willing that that actually happens, because all of that required catching these moments when the plants really needed help. And this applies not only if you're growing a market garden and trying to make money, but it also is the case with your home garden as well. And before I sign off today, therefore, let me show you Rosemary's Home Gardens and a few of our different weed control methods and some things that those of you who have smaller gardens you're growing for yourselves may find helpful just by way of looking at our example. The first thing I want to show you are these raspberries that we featured in a previous video. As you can see, they have come up the way they were supposed to, but today is about weed control. And you may remember that I put cardboard down, and look at how nicely the cardboard with the hay on top has managed to control the weeds. Almost no weeds except in the middle where I didn't apply the cardboard so that the roots of the raspberries could come up. So this whole cardboard and mulch thing really does work, and if you're a home gardener, it's an option. Obviously I can't use it out in the field when I'm dealing with, or the boys are dealing with 3/4 of an acre of corn, or I'm dealing with a third to a half of an acre of kale, but in a small garden it really works well. Over here in one of Rosemary's other gardens, you can see her tomatoes. She's been through and hoed these once. They look beautiful with the rain we just had. These tomatoes, now that she's hoed them once, are going to be mulched with loose hay from cleaning out the pole barn. And the idea is that that will suppress future germinations of weeds. It'll keep the weeds under control. Really, apart from some hand weeding around the tomato plants, we don't expect to do any more weeding in the tomatoes than that brief hoeing that Rosemary did this past weekend. You can see that the mulch in the potatoes is holding the weeds at bay as well. We've been through the potatoes once and pulled out the big weeds, but now that the potatoes are as big as they are, the weeds are pretty much not something that we need to worry about. I want to take you up to the front garden, but as I go, let me show you some other places where mulch is so important. Look at this. I also did that around the rhubarb and the raspberry patch up here, and as you can see, the weeds have not taken over. And there's been no weeding in there at all. But here's the front garden, and as you can see, it will need some attention. These are the onions, which have been cultivated a few times but now need hand weeding because the onions are so big. When you're in the home garden, your instrument of destruction can be a little hand tool like this. Do you see the onions in there? These little things. This fits right between the onions, and I can just go along like this And if I had two hands instead of filming, my other hand would be pulling out some of these weeds that it's missing, just using my fingers. But because I've gone through with this first, the weeds are really nice and loose. And this doesn't take very long at all. This is why you plant in rows, I guess. And this works, of course, for the other things that are coming up as well. If you look over here, we finally have some lettuce coming up, and I've gone through and cleared that out as well. So I guess the message of this unglamorous video today is, look at your gardens. This is make or break right now. If you're a home gardener, market gardeners know this. If you're a home gardener, just by way of reminder in this video, you may have had high expectations and idealism in planting. It may have looked beautiful when you tilled it all in, but after a rain like this, the weeds are going to come up. Don't despair. Get in your garden, spend a couple hours. You won't regret it, and your garden will say thank you. That's it for today. God bless. Enjoy your weeding. Subscribe, follow along. We'll have another adventure that I hope is more glamorous next time.